Hello class, Mr. Alvey here. Just wanted to check in with you for assignment 4. This is a very pivotal week for the class. We're learning all about objects and object-oriented programming, and we got a taste of it last week with the struct, and now we are going to look at it completely with defining a class and actually creating objects. So I wanted you to get a solid foundation, and hopefully you've been able to read about it, and with the other activities you've been able to figure out how to create a class. So I'll just kind of talk about these things through while I give you a little bit of assistance on assignment 4. Okay, you're given a few starter files. You have your main CPP for assignment 4, and it's got an product.h file and a product.cpp file for you to set up your object to define your class. So in C++, whenever we create an object, we'll always have the class defined in the in the .h file, and we'll always implement the code in a .cpp file to be able to keep these two worlds separate. So one is what it does, the properties, the functions it has, so anyone can look at that. And then in the CPP, we have the functionality of how it actually does what it does. In production, like if you're sending out a program that you wrote and selling it out in the real world or whatever, you would let the people who are going to use your program see your .h file, so they could see everything that the class does. And then they can have the CPP hidden, and the functionality can be your private work that you've done. So they don't get to see how you do it; they just get to see what it can do. So that's why we keep those files separate. All right. In assignment 4, the number 1 instruction is we are supposed to create a class for a product that stores name, base price, weight, and description of the product. So I want to help you building this first class so we can create this object properly. You're given this file for a starter. It has a little check here to make sure when this file gets imported in other places that it will only get defined once, and it's important to have these definitions and a check for the definition in here, just so things don't get double imported and weird stuff happens. So it's good to keep this stuff in here. Alright, so the instructions are we're going to put our class here. The keyword for creating a class is the keyword class. Then you give the name of your object. So this one is going to be product. And it's a good idea that it matches the name of the file. It's also a very good idea. The convention is that we capitalize the names of classes. You saw before when we were creating functions, functions should start with a lowercase letter, but classes should always be capitalized. Okay. Then we connect this class to a body of code. Alright, and there's a few sections that we're going to have inside of a class. We're going to have a private section. This is where we're going to define the member variables for this object, for this class. Okay, and it said in our list in the instructions that we want to store the name. So, okay, let's make it a string called name. Now, if you did your reading, it's a good idea not to not to include the standard namespace inside of a header file. It's just bad practice. So I can include the string library, but I don't want to do the using namespace. So I'm just going to manually tell it that it's in the standard namespace each time. So also in the standard namespace, using a string description. And base price, that would be a floating point value. Price needs the decimals for the change, and also a float for the weight. Okay, so we can be more exact. All right, so these member variables, the attributes, or the properties of your object, should most often be kept private. Okay, this means that only the functions that belong to the class are allowed to use these variables. So someone wouldn't be able to access these variables directly and mess around with your code. Okay, there's a public section where we're going to create the we're gonna define the functions that we're going to be implementing. Okay, which is the function headers for each one. So the functions in the instruction says we're supposed to create a prompt method function. I use those words interchangeably. Prompt doesn't return anything, so we'll keep it void. Okay, don't need to send it any parameters, so that's the setup for that function. Some other functions, we need a get sales tax function. Okay, that one needs to return a float. Okay, and it's a good idea when you're defining your functions inside of the header file that if the function isn't going to make any changes to any of the attributes in your object, you should declare it as a constant function. Just to, at the end, after the function declaration, the const is telling us that it won't be changing anything about this current object. So if we're just getting information, we don't want anything to be changed, so const is a good idea. Okay, we got get sales tax, we've got get shipping cost. Also should be a constant. We get total price. Follow that same pattern. Then we're just getting these values. Okay, so sometimes I'll call this a getter functions, where I just use a function to access the variables. So instead of accessing the variables directly, I use a function so I could get to control how the user is getting the values from this object. Let's see, get total price, we got that. There's also one more that I would probably add. I would want to get the base price. Okay. Now this function is simple enough that I can even put the body of the function in the header file. When it's simply a getter like this, sometimes I will just avoid putting that into the CPP because it's obvious I'm just going to return the name of the variable, and that's okay. It's not revealing anything, and it's small enough that it's not going to slow anything down. Okay. It also says in the instructions that we are supposed to create 3 display methods to display the data. So there should be like an advertising one, an inventory, and a receipt. Alright, so these functions, they don't return anything. Display advertising. Again, not going to change anything. Just going to be printing based on the information in the variables. Inventory. I before E except after C. Okay. Oh, and don't forget, this is what the mistake I used to make when I first started programming. I always forgot the semicolon at the end of a class. After the closing bracket of the body of your class, it's important to put that semicolon so that it knows that it's finished. Okay, so this is a good way, a good setup for your class. We've got 4 member variables, and we've got 8 different functions, member functions, things that the object can do. Okay. Now, I think I'll probably help you out with the first function, with prompt, just to show you how you would implement a function in the CPP file. Okay. Now, by default, it has a hashtag include the product.h file. Okay, that's how we connect this file to the class definition. We have to include the h file, and it should match the name of the .h file. All right, so that's included here. Okay. This is where a lot of the functionality happens, so I'm probably going to end up using a lot of the things that I have used previously, like the IO stream for input and output. I'll need the string library, and I might be using the IO manip for formatting, since I'm going to be outputting a lot of things. And it's appropriate in the CPP file, where you have all your functionality, that is appropriate for using namespace standard. So we can save a little bit of time there. Just not in the .h file. Alright, so an example of implementing the void function prompt. Okay. So the name is prompt, and it returns a void. But to connect this to the header, and so it knows what scope and where this belongs, we need to declare, or not declare, but we need to use the name of the class, if I can spell, okay, and then we have the scope operator. Alright, this connects it and saying it's being defined for this class. Okay, it's important to have that for each one of your methods that you're doing. Alright, so the prompt is fairly simple. It's just doing some output and asking for some input. So it's going to ask you to enter a name. And then we can use the function getLine with cn to input the name. Do the same thing for description. get line. Do that again for weight. This time, it's not a string this time, so we can just use cn and stream it in through the weight variable. Okay. The weight variable is defined inside the class. All right, so inside of our function that belongs to that class, we are allowed to access the weight variable. Okay. And then for name as well, and oops, did I type name there? That should be description. You can see those are the names of our variables, so they're declared here, and we're using them inside this function. We're allowed to, because even though they're private, we are doing a function for that class, so that's where it's appropriate to use these variables. Okay, I'm going to make a local variable to this function, a Boolean value is bad price. Okay, so I'm going to do a little loop here to check to get them to enter a good price. And I'll check it a little bit to make sure that they type in something good. So this allows me to demonstrate the do while loop. We're just going to jump in and do something, and then we'll define the while at the end. So the condition for keeping this loop going will define after it runs once. I sometimes call this a run once loop. All right. We will set bad price to false. Then we will ask the user to enter a price. There's our base price variable from product.h. It's just going to be a floating point, so I'm using the cn stream. All right, now for an important question. If, from cn, if there is a fail, or the base price is less than 0. We don't want any prices that are less than 0. We're trying to make money in our business here. Okay. If there's a fail or the base price is less than 0, then that's bad. So I would set is bad price to true. We found a bad price. Okay, and this would be an appropriate time to clear cn. Some people have had trouble figuring out when to clear and ignore things. Okay. If I have a failure in the cn stream, it's a good idea to clear it. And then I'm also going to ignore up to 256 characters up until a new line character.
Kenzie Sullivan, would you please come to the front office?
I'm in school right now. Excuse my
come to the front office?
announcements. It's about time for school to start. Okay. So we're going to clear and ignore cn so it's ready to get another cn, another try at the base price. Okay, so the condition is while is bad price is true. If that's true, it's going to repeat this function. It's going to keep doing it until they type in a price that is an actual number and it's not less than 0. And we'll just keep clearing it and asking them again if that doesn't work. Okay. So that would be the implementation for the prompt function. Now I have my variables my class defined. I've started to implement the functions in my CPP file. Now, going back to main, in the other CPP file, I have a main function. It's asking me to declare my product object here. So if I've included the header file of the object that I've made, I'm ready to create a product object. So I'm instantiating the object. The type of the object is called product. That's what I called it. Now I've made my own data type, really. That object has its own type. Product. The name, I'll call it product. Okay. Could be any name. You could make the variable name anything you wanted, but I'm just going to call it product for consistency today. All right. And then it wants us to call the prompt function. Okay, so you take the instance of the object that you've created, and using the dot operator, you can access anything in public. So right now, all I have in public are functions. They can't directly access my properties because they're private. Okay, so I say dot, and I can call any of those functions I've defined. I'm going to call the prompt function. Okay, and I'll save that. Make sure to save this. Okay. A few more things you're going to have to do. You're going to have to make a few more calls in there. Okay, let's see if this compiles. So another thing you're going to be introduced to this week is creating a makefile. When we have these separate files that we're defining all over the place, the makefile allows us to compile and run the code all from one file. So inside your makefile that's also given to you, what you're doing is you're defining a .out file that is your running program, and that will be made up of the files product.h, product.cpp, and assign04.cpp. You're going to compile that. So this is important right here. On the next line, it has to be tabbed. It has to be tabs. Okay, spaces will mess things up. We're going to say use the G++ compiler and compile together product.cpp and assign04.cpp. Each one of those will include product.h, so that will all get compiled together. Okay, and we're going to see more examples of this in later assignments. But what this does is we can go into our directory where our files are inside of a console, and if our make file is working properly, all we have to do is call make. Time for class to start. I better wrap this up. You call make, and you see it's already complaining about my tabs. Did I put a space in there? Okay. Let's see if I messed that up. All right, let's try that again. There we go. So it needed to be a tab. I had some sort of weird space issue there. All right. So the make, what that did is that created a.out. Then I can run that file like a program, and it will run my code. And if my prompt's working properly, enter name. That is me. Enter price. I'm just making up some values here. And then the other functions will happen later. That's not working yet. Okay. But we got a good start. Okay. Remember, you can use the make file to remake after you've made some changes. Okay. Hopefully that helps you get started. I'm going to end there. Have a great day.